Hello and welcome everyone to this discussion as part of the WeAreDevelopers Live Week, which is happening from Monday to Friday this week. We have an exciting panel on the topic Innovating during the crisis, and we will see how different organizations and different people within these organizations have managed to keep innovation up during this unprecedented times, how changes within their organizations, let's say work from home, have impacted how they innovate, and what they think the future post-corona or within this pandemic that we're still seeing will look like, and what it means for the innovation power of their own houses. We have an exciting panel. I will quickly go through this, our lineup, and then we will dive right into the questions and hopefully have a lively discussion that adds value to whatever you do in your professional lives. We have Martin Wietzowski, who is the Chief Designer and Futurist at SAP. He's going to give us hopefully a bit of an outlook of what one of the biggest European companies is doing in terms of innovative power, and what the future, as his title is Futurist, what the future might hold for us. Next is Nicolas Bührer, who's the CEO of Digital Switzerland. Digital Switzerland is one of the biggest digital initiatives in Europe, has been bringing together stakeholders from this digital leadership sphere to really transform the country and also the economy within the country. Georg Hauer is also part of our discussion today. He's the general manager for the DACH region, the German-speaking region at N26. N26 is a mobile and digital bank based in Berlin, but active around the world, and has also been faced with challenges within this crisis. But as we know, startups usually know how to dig themselves out of a hole and how to adapt to changed circumstances. So excited to hear what Georg has to offer in terms of solutions. And last but not least, we have Caitlin Cheng, who's the brand innovation lead at Accenture Interactive. And then also she hasn't been in that position for too long. So I'm excited to hear, first of all, how she has adapted within these crazy times. And to hear her perspective on what's going on at one of the biggest consultancies around the world. All right, guys, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for participating. Excited to hear what you have to offer. First question, preparing for this, I wrote in different media, and Harvard Business Review had an exciting article about exactly this topic that we're trying to discuss. And I would like to go around and give each and every one of you a few minutes to pick up on that statement that they made, is there's nothing like a crisis to ignite innovation. So is this crisis really a boost for innovation? Will we see new solutions, new businesses popping up as a result of the coronavirus crisis? Do you agree with this statement, and what's your outlook on that? Maybe going through the line that I see right now, Nicolas, maybe you can start and give us your view on this topic.
Okay, I definitely agree. It's not a surprise. I even believe, since this crisis is even more somewhere disrupting the world than the subprime crisis or even the 2000 crisis, I believe the innovation will be also more disruptive, which we will see in the next 5 to 10 years. Let's face it, no one was prepared 2 months ago. We were just going to the work. We were looking to Asia and believed it will never come to Europe. Let's see where we are 2.5 months later. It's quite insane. Doing a Zoom conference would have been unthinkable even 2 months ago. And I believe, since our mindset, and I think that through our members and many companies, since the mindset are changing so radically within the last 2 months, I believe innovation will be very disruptive. So for me, there is a dependency between let's say, the strength of a crisis and the potential innovation we will see in the future. So I believe, let's stay tuned. In the next decade, we will see many new disrupting innovations.
Caitlin, do you agree with this statement? What's your view on innovation during the crisis?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of us have seen a lot of memes in the past few weeks. And one of my favorite memes, I think, has been the questionnaire one that a lot of us saw on Twitter, which was, who accelerated the digitalization in your company? A, CEO, B, CIO, 3, CFO. the corona and everybody corona. Yeah. And exactly like Nicholas just said, I think we are already doing things that was unthinkable just 2 months ago, right? Me also coming from South Korea originally, I used to say up until a few months ago, the innovation that we're seeing in Asia is just something that we will probably never be able to do in Europe because of all of, a lot of concerns about privacy and every single concerns and just, the lack of, let's say, the very resistance to innovation and whatnot. But all of that has changed completely over the past two months. And I think that's really actually amazing, because if you think about it, when is it easiest to innovate, right? It's easiest to innovate, or when you're sort of like, when you put on the innovator's hat, or you want to be the person who's like Einstein and who's like developing stuff. You think, I want to think of something new, but never does it come really just so like that, just because you want to think about something new. It's usually when you think of a problem, right? And when you really feel that problem, when you want to solve that problem, usually the best ideas come most easily. And that's why I think it's a matter of course that when the problem is so big that the entire world is feeling it right now, then the entire world is forced to think about solutions to solve this problem. And that is in itself innovation. So absolutely agree.
Georg, what's your take?
Yeah, I 100% agree. A crisis truly changes our daily lives, and everyone around the world faces now new challenges. And new challenges also mean new needs, new customer needs. And companies around the world have joined forces in solving some of those problems, and other challenges need to be solved individually for companies, and also are opportunities for new companies to emerge. In fact, if we look back at the 2008-2009 financial crisis, some of the most important unicorns of the last decade all were founded in the aftermath of that crisis, like Uber, Airbnb, and other big unicorns. And as a matter of fact, even N26 the founding of N26 was triggered by the financial crisis, because banks back then had completely lost the trust of customers and were preoccupied by themselves. And that just shows that crises are not just a disaster for the economy, which it absolutely is, but it also provides certain opportunities for young companies and existing companies to deliver new features, new products, and solve new customer problems. And ultimately, that's how innovation generally works. A crisis just accelerates the need for adoption. And ultimately, we will probably see in a couple of years from now which impact Corona will have had on our economy and our innovation. But there will certainly be also some positive aspects to that.
So I'm just realizing that we've lost Martin. We will just carry on. I don't know what's happening there. Maybe didn't want to discuss the future with us as a futurist. Maybe he will also join the conversation later. I've written him. Otherwise, we will just carry on in this lineup, which makes sense because then you can talk more a bit. You get a bit more speaking time. This was mentioned by, I think, all three of you, that some things that you didn't think were possible before have now just happened. And I would like to ask you to give a view of either from your organization or what you've seen in other organizations, what exactly was made possible in this crisis that you didn't think could happen before. Caitlin, maybe you can give us an example of what that could be.
Yeah, we're not traveling anymore, right? Before in our company, I think it was just a matter of fact. You felt as if you were not being polite if you're not actually traveling to the client site and seeing the client in person, at least for a first kennenlernen meeting, so get to know meeting. And also the colleagues that you don't know, to meet them for the first time, it felt like you had to somehow do a kickoff all together in the same space. If you wanted to do a workshop, you wanted to do it physically in the same space with Post-its so that it feels more tangible and haptic. All of that is not happening anymore. And people are really being surprised at how well it works still digitally. We've started doing a lot of digital workshops on platforms like Neuro. and a lot of design thinking workshops as well. And you would be really surprised actually how well it works rather than how it doesn't work. Because yes, there are some instances where the people who are participating are not really, let's say, used to the platform. And that's why this, let's say, introduction phase has to be in there, and that does take up some time. But what we've realized while doing these digital workshops is that actually it's even better for a lot of the participants to become very, very democratic, right? Because even in the traditional, very playful workshop settings, and especially design thinking workshops, you still see a sort of a hierarchy, right? If you're the senior and the senior says something on a post-it and then you can't really, you try to, but you can't really. But somehow within the digital setting where all of this is completely removed, you're starting to see that a lot of, let's say, the younger colleagues and junior colleagues are starting to be a lot more vocal, because you just can't see who's posting what where, right? And then afterwards you discuss that together. So I think in terms of working digitally, we're seeing a lot of, let's say, advantages that we never even really thought about, aside from the fact that, of course, everyone from all over the world can join at the same time.
Yeah, what was it for you that simply suddenly happened that you thought was impossible?
Yeah, so what's interesting in a tech company, typically you think about how you can solve customer problems with technology, but you very rarely think of the other way around, that a crisis can change the customer behavior faster than any single technology by itself could ever do. And that really made me think that in a certain way, when you build a company and when you prepare organizational structures, it's much more important to remain flexible and be able to react on changing customer needs rather than trying to change customer behavior with your technology. I think intrinsically, that's how successful companies have always built their products. But the Corona crisis really just showed how important it is, even for large corporates, to remain flexible. And I think what we're going to see here in this crisis, and what people are going to learn after this crisis, is that organizational structures will be built in a much more flexible way in order to be ready for such exogenous shocks or influences that just suddenly change things and change the needs of what the company wants to achieve.
But sticking with that for a moment, what are the changes you've seen in terms of customer behavior at M26 that were most accentuated, that were most heavily changed through the crisis?
Yeah. So what was interesting is very often for digital banks, the travel aspect is very important, because young people are very mobile. They travel around the world. They travel around Europe, and they use their payment. They just spend a lot while traveling. Suddenly, the travel aspect was completely gone. But on the other side, a new generation of people needed to still purchase their stuff, their daily expenses, but all that could only be done online. So in fact, suddenly a digital bank like N26 was the best option for not just the let's say people in their mid-30s or 40s, but for anyone to purchase online. So what we did is we very quickly pivoted from certain products that we wanted to build in the travel segment to a product that enabled to use their card within only minutes of opening an account, rather than waiting a week that their physical card arrives in the mail. And this was a product we basically had planned maybe in a couple of months, but we pulled it forward and accelerated their production to make sure that people, while they're locked in their own apartments, could already open a digital bank account and start spending right away. And this is something where we really reacted very fast. And in fact, we could win a lot of new customers in their 50s or 60s, which otherwise would maybe even prefer to go to a bank branch, but in that occasion needed a digital bank.
So I'm glad to announce that we're complete again. We've gotten Martin back. Good to have you. Martin, we are talking about things that you've learned that you thought were impossible, but through the crisis in the past 8 weeks suddenly happened as if out of nowhere. What's an example from your experience that the crisis suddenly made possible that you thought couldn't happen ever?
Well, I believe that we can connect through digital media channels like this one in a pretty decent way. And I think it challenges our biases towards everything, including how we innovate. We always thought that innovation, and as your first question statement here from the article in HBR was, there's nothing like a crisis to ignite innovation. That's also true. However, I think what we learned very quickly here is that it's just an indicator. The crisis will force you to realize, to check your assumptions. If you weren't ready somehow for this, to be this agile and this prepared for this crisis before, you will not be ready during the crisis either. So it is a litmus test for your organization preparedness. And most of all, did you think long term? Or are you still a reactive player for the next 3 months? Do you have company, family values that drive you forward? Or do you only have shareholder value in mind for the next quarters to go forward? So, I mean, it really squeezes out the key, crucial, uncomfortable, and very important questions out of any system, any ecosystem and organization. And this is what I have experienced here. Which I'm super happy for, because my job is obviously to look far ahead.
Nicholas, when you talk to stakeholders from within the ecosystem in Switzerland that are taking part within this digital transformation that there's a lot of talk about, how do you see them adapting to this new normal that we're always talking about? And what are you seeing there that suddenly made possible that wasn't before?
So we see pretty much everything, unfortunately. What said Martin, and I really love it, is it's about sustainability in the future. It's about more than just your shareholders. It's about having a vision and a mission. And I believe that some companies, some organizations really did change their mindsets and their way of working within few weeks, and understood they have to become agile and be ready to pilot. I see the same, by the way, sometimes in startups, which is quite surprising, which are not able to be agile. Somewhere they are stick to their strategy, they are not changing it, and it's obvious they won't survive. So it's interesting, both startups and corporate, we see really a broad range of ways of treating the crisis, from some of them maybe having more liquidity, cash is king, definitely. The same for corporate and startup. I believe in the next couple of weeks, we will see, unfortunately, some important bankruptcy cases. It already started this week in the US, last week. But you have on one side the companies, institution having enough cash and able to be agile and to really change the way they work and getting more digital. And you have the other side who are not able, somewhere they fear what's happening, and I believe they won't survive. So with pretty much everything, I believe some numbers within the startups community in DACH, some statistics says 20% to 25% won't survive the crisis, which is a big amount, but this is as it is. Some others will be big winners.
So we've seen that you all wholeheartedly agree with the statement that a crisis usually ignites innovation. But what we're also seeing, and kind of challenging this assumption a bit, is that companies are trying to survive now, as Nicholas said. And what we see in downturns, in economic downturns, always in recessions, is that investments into innovation, into research and development are one of the first things to be cut. So how can a crisis ignite innovation when at the same time we are cutting spending in the areas most relevant to innovation and to innovating in the future, especially, instead of surviving today? Martin, maybe you have an idea of a view of how we can combine those two trends.
Yes, it's a great topic, and I think it's one that's been a little bit sort of stigmatized by, let's call it, the market. Hi guys, the market. I love the shareholders. These folks are our family. There are partners looking forward and so on. The ecosystem of us in this together is much larger. There are the startups. They are the real partners that actually work with us, the supply chain or whatever we have around us, and our customers. It's the academia. It's everybody that comes into your ecosystem and has something to offer and builds a relationship through that, and that you are also relevant back to. It's relationships first. Services, products, and features come in that pyramid much later. So design your relationships, the rest will follow. That's what I'm saying. And we need to drop this idea that how can we manage the short-term versus long-term thinking? Like if there was a war going on. It's not. We developed something we call the Innovation Curation Map. It's a little bit like curating food. You can curate ideas. And I propose that we look through our business activities and business incentives. We incentivize on great execution. We want answers and hard action. We are action biased, and that bias is a psychological disaster sometimes, because we are biased to do things right, to execute according to plan and resources and so on. Sometimes this is called the scalable efficiency or repeatable results. All sounds good, and if you do it well, you will get your bonus. Amazing. However, repeatable results are the diagonal opposite to innovation by definition. So if you're in the business of repeatable design, the results, doing things right, you might not be doing the right things. You might just be running very, very efficiently in very wrong direction. So I encourage everybody to see that this is the same playfield, to do things right, and do the right things, to explore curiously, to understand your point of view, is the same business as then later put it into the ground, for example, during the crisis. This is why you coach your team before you put them into a match. It's the same team. It's not versus anything. It's the same ideology. So going back to purpose, what is the future you see? What are the narratives as a second step that you can build around that future where you play a significant and positive role? Now you start to reach your strategic point of view. Once you have that, and only then, you can have a strategy. And when you have a strategy, and this is a hard body of work to do before you go to your validate, incubate, and scale. You need that strategy. Strategy builds on visions. Visions build on your purpose and your outlooks and your visions, long-term visions. And that's for me a one family of games and business activities, including imagination and all that. So that was my big manifesto here for long-term thinking. And short-term thinking is the true pandemic.
Sticking with you first, yes, Caitlin.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I keep seeing repeatedly happening actually within the past few weeks that we really should take care not to do is to confuse agility and quick wins. Yeah. Because oftentimes what we're doing is, okay, so this whole Corona crisis there, and therefore we have to react. Of course we have to react. And therefore we're doing a lot of these workshops with clients and discussing what can we do. And oftentimes then a lot of times within these workshops, super ideas come out, right? And these super ideas are sometimes very innovative or very disruptive. But of course, if an idea is disruptive, then by definition, it is harder to implement, right? It would take more time to develop it. It would be a lot more time intensive and whatnot. And then oftentimes you end up thinking, okay, so that's a great idea. I really like it. But now we have to react very agile and react very fast to this Corona crisis. Therefore, we set that somehow in a drawer aside and hopefully not forget about it. And we do, what are the quick wins that we can get? Let's do the easier ones first, right? And I think that's very dangerous because yes, of course, we do have to think about the quick wins and how do we get out of this, let's say, slump as fast as possible. But I think the mindset enforcement has to keep coming from top down. I think otherwise it is never going to be possible to have both parallel work streams, right? One is to work on the quick wins, but that does not define the entirety of your agile response to Corona. You also have to start thinking now about, okay, all these innovative ideas that came up is a great opportunity and we have to start working on it as well, parallel, because otherwise you're never going to do it and then you're going to forget about it again And then hopefully, but maybe not, in a few months, another crisis will come and you'll have to react again, and the same story will happen. So.
Georg, picking up on that and asking for the view from a, well, slightly larger, but still a startup, I guess. How do you balance this supposed conflict of short-term versus long-term? I mean, startups are by definition short-term oriented, but they have these huge goals in the future. How is that happening at N26, especially within the crisis?
So generally, I would say that a crisis gets the best and the worst out of people and of companies during a crisis. And very often what you see during a crisis and the decisions you have to take during a crisis are actually based on what you've built before. So if companies have invested a lot into research and development and innovation before the crisis, then a crisis is the time when you can harvest those ideas, potentially put those in these past innovations or past ideas into new context, new perspective. So many companies will realize that some products they had or have already developed will suddenly be useful for new customer needs and a new context. But for those companies that have already in the past tried to cut costs in innovation, those companies will also likely take the decision to cut costs during the crisis or even further cut them. And that's going to backfire very fast. So at N26, we changed our product roadmap because of the crisis. But in fact, we just raised recently money, $100 million, to accelerate our investments into innovation. Because as a matter of fact, if you look at the past crisis, the financial crisis and the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, Google was not the largest search engine before the dot-com bubble. But it was the one company that emerged out of the crisis as one of the largest tech companies in the world. And that's going to be similar with this crisis. Some companies are going to emerge stronger and larger than ever before out of this crisis. And we want to make sure that we're one of them. And that's why we invest into innovation.
What we're seeing now, and there is a lot of examples of this, I've highlighted two, is these super fast, super efficient developments of new products, of new strategies. There was Dyson that designed a new ventilator in 10 days, and there was a big story in Forbes on Pfizer's CEO that's sort of staking his entire career on developing a vaccine in a couple of months. The fastest vaccine so far developed, I think, was 4 years in the 1950s. Are these moonshots, these big bets that make it or break it, that sort of stake maybe even a company's success? Is that what sustainable innovation looks like? Is that what companies should aim for? Nicholas, what's your view on this question?
Well, let's face it. I think it's more a kind of bet on the short term. It's maybe more about visibility. It's about prestige to have, of course, the one who will make the race for the vaccine until end of the year. Here's, of course, the question of prestige. I'm not sure it's for the long term, but I believe it's important. As Georg said, all companies who were not able to innovate enough or quickly enough before the crisis, who had too high debt or not enough cash, will disappear. It's clear. They will be replaced. They will disappear, and some other will emerge. So it's interesting, and Dyson is a good example. Dyson was always an innovative company. So we see now within 2 weeks, they were able to develop something new. It's not out of nowhere. So it's either it's in your DNA and you might survive and get much bigger, or you will disappear, unfortunately. And I think for many of them, many of the companies, also for our small organization, was a big change to go all home office, to change a lot in our processes and a lot in our projects. So within 4 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, we changed half of the organization and the projects we did. We are small, startup-like, doable. For big companies who are not used to this kind of short-term change, it will be very complicated. So I think this year we'll see an emergence of like innovation which are needed right now, also about representation and visibility. I'll say it again, we should not forget it's not only about 2020. You have to be innovative and agile every year and always following a sustainable vision of your company.
I think
Martin,
that's
I saw
that's
you
the thing
nodding.
that's very important. Sorry. So, you know, at the end of the day, then are the big companies, the dinosaurs, like all doomed? Are they all going to die? Like there's nothing we can do anymore, so we just like give up? No, right? So for those big companies that are really worried, and they do also oftentimes these companies also acknowledge and realize that they are dinosaurs. They are really big. They don't know where to begin, right? They do know that there has to be something done, but where do I begin? And I think that's where agility should come in, right? The whole lean startup method of, if we do have an innovative idea that we can start to work on, let's not completely make a 1-year plan or a 5-year plan for the development of it. Rather, let's make a small prototype that could be workable, try that out, test it in the market, test it within the organization, see if it works. If it works, great, we have a success case, and based on that, we can expand. So I think that mindset is probably, hopefully, the only thing that will really help the bigger companies to be able to be really agile. And that's what I mean by agility is not something that you create some sort of project that will be done within 1 week, right? That's not what agility means. Yeah.
How, when you talk to clients, to companies you work with, how far are we, saying we like European companies maybe, or German-speaking companies, how far are we in this change of mindset at the moment, and how much work is still needs to be done?
I think it really depends. I think mostly overall, all the companies that I talk to, I see that this need for change is there. Everybody realizes there is a need. And I think that is a huge improvement to, let's say, 2 months ago, because compared to 2 months ago, there wasn't even a need, or not too much of a need. And now the need is there. But now, therefore, the next step is, okay, now what? I want to do something. I know I need to do something, but I have no idea where to begin, right? And there you see levels of varying differences of, let's say, readiness for that. And I think that's where, you know, where we have to work on with different companies together.
Martin, is SAP making moonshot bets at the moment to, you know, save themselves?
I mean, we always do moonshot bets. We actually call it the slingshot, because all good moonshots are building something on imagination. Going to the moon for John F. Kennedy. Hey guys, we're going to the moon. We're bringing a guy with us, and the same guy comes back alive. And by the way, you have 10 years to buy. That is a pure fantasy. We don't have the math, the technology. We had nothing. So what you do, the first thing you do, and back to Kathleen, I mean, how do you build? I'm back to this values, your family values, your ecosystemic values. If you say something that far out on a stage, and you say 10 of these things per year, how can you make people not only believe in that, oh, he's not crazy, he's actually trying to do great business and improve people's lives, I should go with that person. And why I met my expertise and my heart into this business will help that person actually to look better in the end of the day, because this is imagination takes you to that, we call it the third horizon of innovation, and you slingshot only with imagination to the second horizon, where Georg said, this is where you actually build this space rocket for real. The first space rocket was just imaginary, it was a VR set. Now, when you woke everybody up and they're with you because they share the values, the ecosystem, now you go to the real work and you close it to your stakeholders today, because you close it to the first horizon of innovation, which is incremental bettering. Second horizon of innovation, take that to your ecosystem if they are convinced. And then you go to the third horizon of innovation, which is the impossible stuff, but you convinced yourself and everybody else that, damn, we will do this. That goes back to these values. And this is how we operate all the time. I mean, we've been around for 50 years. And, you know, at least in my office, we talk about what will happen the next 50 years to the future of work. What does it mean to work? And what does it mean to be human 50 years from now? Oh man, these questions, if you haven't understand why you are relevant for anybody 10 years from now, you will not be relevant for anybody 10 years from now. So start thinking about that. And just confirm what you guys saying. It's an intellectual process. It's your ideology that comes in play first. The engineering, the technology, what you can do now, That's the easy part compared to that big sphere of thoughts that you need to have in a play. Imagination is a business activity.
I would like to slowly getting to the end of the discussion that could go on for evenings, I'm guessing. If we look at the future, which might be 5 months, might be 2 years, whatever you think is a relevant time frame, what do you think will be different after we've experienced this never before seen change of circumstances maybe? What do you think, looking at innovation, looking at business, maybe also society or technology, what do you think 1 or 2 changes might be that stick with us? Will we travel less? Will we work from home all the time? Will we run around with face masks? Will we be more innovative, less innovative? What's your stance on this? Maybe Caitlin, starting with you.
I think definitely things like elastic working will definitely stay. It was very interesting. Alone in our office as well, one of our bosses said, well, you know, I actually, to be completely honest with all of you, I really don't like this home office thing. I can't concentrate at home. I'm not used to this. I really don't want to. I really look forward to the day that I can come back to the office and have, you know, coffee chats with my colleagues and see you guys in person. But I also realized, that was really great that he asked this. I also realized that that might be, you know, a very polarizing statement, right? And so I would just like to know how many of us would still like to stay in home office even after Corona is over. Let's raise our hands. And more than half raised their hands, right? And said, you know what, actually, we didn't know that it would be so great, but we've tried it and it really works well. We're going to stay doing this even if there's no virus anymore, right? And he was very pleasantly surprised as well, right? Because he said, that's okay, it's really great to know that this, let's say, complete other Meinungen, opinions are there. And I think things like that. So that's not just with working. So like with working, elastic working, we call it, but it's, you know, not only with working, instead all, let's say, new digital habits that customers have started to form. Like people are buying a lot more online. People are doing a lot of things more online, Zoom weddings and whatnot, right? All of these are scary and seem weird before you do it. But then once you start doing it, and people have been doing it for the past 3 months, now they're used to it, they see the advantages of it. A lot of that will stay even if Corona is not there anymore. And that's what we mean by, therefore, customers will also change their habits, and therefore companies have to be able to be prepared for that.
Nicholas, what do you think will change in this new normal that everyone is talking about?
2 points. The first one, the world is getting hybrid. As Kathleen said, it's not going back to what we were before. Hopefully, it's not going to be only digital and home office, because it's a bit of boring with time, but I think to have the mix of video conference, of traveling, of home office, of normal office time, of digital, of physical stuff, it's definitely going hybrid. And having in 1 or 2 years ahead a video conference, maybe instead of traveling for 5 hours, will be normal. But every second time, I believe we will still travel, because we are still humans and we need to meet also each other. I believe big decisions will still be taken in face-to-face. That's the first one. And the second one, it's my hope. Right now, it's the priority of only a few people. I believe soon it will go back. It's just everything about the environment, about sustainability. Forget just about the profit. There is more than that on Earth. We see now it's a bit a clash on our heads. And I hope most of the people, if not everyone, let's say in 2021 and ahead, when the crisis is gone, we will think and act more sustainable and more for our environment.
Georg, your stance on a changed future.
Yeah. So I have an expectation and a hope. I expect that companies from now on will think digital first when they're building any product, because people realized in the current world, when people are getting used to these new work styles, also the things that they consume need to be digital as well. A product that's only in the analog offline world is likely not going to have a long-term future. My hope after this crisis is that we proved as a humanity that we're able to solve massive problems together by joining forces. And I really hope that this will also translate towards the next big and potentially even bigger challenge we're facing, which is climate change. In fact, I think engineers will play a massive role in addressing also that problem. And we, as a humanity, we just need to create a sense of urgency, as we did with as we realized very fast with the current crisis that we need to act fast. Climate change is similarly urgent. It just didn't change our behavior yet. And if we're able to also understand the urgency, we will be also able to solve that challenge.
Martin, same question.
Yeah, good one. I think we will go back to many normal things that we predict we want. We will travel, we will meet in bars and hug each other and so on. That will happen, although with a different mindset. So I think the mindset will change. We are still apes, the best ape so far, nevertheless, and a monkey. So I'm going back to the bigger picture, which is my job. Love Schopenhauer's quote that talent hits the targets no one can hit, which means that you win on a market, right? I got this customer, I made a win, you win, you hit the target nobody could. But genius hits targets nobody can see, which should suppose a question to you. What did you see? What was your vision? So guys, back to vision. And this crisis should learn us one thing to take on forward. You need the vision to have a strategy. And you need this good strategy building on your vision and your values before you go to tactics, which means react on a crisis, for example. That's tactics. And I think one thing that happens not so often, we could see the future. Futurism is never about predicting. It's about understanding the spectrum of possibilities. China gave us the future 3, 4, 5 months before Europe, before US. How did we react on actually a future that will happen to us? Well, there were different answers to that question, both politically and action-wise. Then Italy, then Spain, and then so on. All these, that was the future on TV, in broad daylight. We could understand it. I think it should wake us up. You can actually see the future or create one that you want to live in if you take these steps, if you take futurism as something that you own, that you'll be the protagonist of the futures you want to live in rather than a consumer of it. Because if you are, and if you don't digitize like Georg say and so on, you consume a future you might not like, and then might you kill you if you wish. So be futurist, do the things, do the right things before you do them right, and have a vision.
Yeah, and I think the collective optimism, because we all collectively experienced a crisis, and we collectively had this angst, but now we collectively survived it, and now we all know on a collective level that it can work even when we try different things. And I think that in itself is a huge step actually for humankind in terms of being more let's say open to innovation. And I think that's a great way to sort of end this discussion on a very optimistic way, which I totally believe in.
I fully agree. Thank you for lifting the spirits, not just towards the end of the discussion, but actually throughout the discussion. Thank you everyone who was watching this. I hope it was interesting to you and it added value. Usually I would say, I'm sure that the speakers are around for one-on-ones. This is obviously not possible, but I would suggest if you want to get in touch with them, find them on LinkedIn and add them. I'm sure they would love to interact and connect with you guys. Stay tuned to it. There's still 1.5 days of exciting panels. And thank you, Nicholas, Georg, Caitlin, and Martin for talking about innovating during the crisis. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.